Okay guys, RC back again. I had a request to show you what a really bad three-wheel looks like, and it is really hard to see. I'm trying to give you the best vantage point I can on this rear tire opposite. You see that tire bouncing? That's what we're looking for. It's just really hard to get it on camera. You should be able to see it from that. But, alas, without any further ado, the awesome part of a TJT of getting the shoes right. Putting the front tire back on straight here. So, the first thing I'll do, take a stock, brand new, restricted shoe. I will lightly file it back and forth, make sure it's flat. This is with with the most minor pressure I can. You will need a flat block, like a RT Tech block. There's also another flat block from Scale Engineering for checking your restriction. As you can see, I sand a little bit more in the middle. I'm not quite touching the back here, not quite, almost. That's hard to see with the reflections. So you want to try and get this as flat as possible, obviously. So now, what are we looking for? We are looking for perfection, because that's the way a TJT goes. And perfection is however far you want to take it. I spent up to 3 hours on one pair of shoes. Yes, I did win that race, because if I didn't, I would probably never spend 3 hours on a pair of shoes again. Thanks for not running the 6-car Rick. That was great. So, we're going to sand the shoe till it's flat. It's got just a little bit of banana in it, just a little bit. It's just this file takes us so little, it just takes forever. But that's because you don't want to sand too fast. If you sand too fast and you lean wrong, you can really hurt your shoe. So for extensive purposes of this, that's close enough. So, this is my favorite pair of pliers ever. It is a pair of parallel jaw pliers with an angle cut in it. The angle is so right now this is more of like a 90, it's 90 degree at the top, or close. So I can grab this like this, and then I can, let me hold it this way so you can see. So I can hold this like this, and then I can use my nail, or and just bend this further over, so that'll give me more restriction. With 300 front tires, it's necessary. It's a necessary evil. So what we're looking for here, we're going to do one shoe at a time. What we're looking for is we are looking to, as a basic generic setup, the shoe should. So the shoe, get every piece of metal out of the way here. I don't know if you'll be able to see this. I can barely see it here from this angle. So basically, whenever the front of the car lifts up, whenever you tap on the very back here. So we're going to tap back here and lift the car. When we tap the car after it's not three-wheeling, okay, we want to see that the shoe lifts off the block at the exact same time the front tire does. That gives you, depending on your rail height, if you have a 10 thou rail, that gives you 10 thou of movement on the rail. If it's 15 thou rail, you get 15 thou rail. Obviously, this changes depending on the track, the downforce, the setup of the car, everything like that. So that's what we're trying to hit. I can't really show that on camera, but I will use, like this is a 7x glass. I'll usually use a 10x glass. This is over restricted just a hair. I can just see a tiny little parcel of daylight there, and so I think that we are probably about 2 thou restricted too much, roughly. And that's really hard to tell when you put a glass under there. A lot of times you'll see, if you look at me and I'm working on shoes, you'll see me looking at. You'll see me looking into a fluorescent light at a race, and that's what I'm looking for. Help if I The thing I did is I took the 26 rear front tire off and thought I put the 300 back on, put the 26 back on. I couldn't figure out why the car was still three-wheeling. Alright, so that's better. So, yeah, and now that the tire's down, the shoe's actually touching a little bit, which is easier to show you what's going on. So, you see, the front tires lift, the shoe does not. See, so we still need to restrict that a little bit. So, you can, depending on the angle of your pliers, like what I have, or you can bend it back a little bit. Bending it back a little bit will also tend to restrict it a little. You don't want to go too far back or else you get some other issues. Like you can hit the spacers on the front end. So we've now moved it. And I actually made it worse. I made it worse, and I know why, because it hit a sweet spot to where it doesn't actually touch. I didn't actually bend it much more. So we're going to bend it back a little bit to make sure we're hitting that front shelf. You'll see me sometimes. Now, I will use these pliers on the shoe like this because they're parallel, so that way I don't mar the shoe or the flat ride patch, and that's for a reason, because we want to get as much of that shoe flat as we can on the racing line. So with this, I was just, a lot of times you'll see me, I'll take the pliers like this, put the car out of the way so you can see. I'll put the point in there like so, and then I'll bend it back a little bit. Therefore, I'm putting pressure on the corner I want it to bend on, to try and make sure that I don't round the front of the shoe right here, so that way I don't round that down, because I just want to get the longest contact surface possible. And when you move it back, it will get a little tighter to fit on the chassis. Kind of a little normal. Not go too far. So I pulled it back out a little bit because I moved it too far back, and now we are back to this. We've still got a little bit. Just bear with me on the camera here, guys. It's hard enough to describe shoes to people without, well, in real life without a camera. So sometimes you just gotta make do with what you got. And so I just squoze it a little bit with the pliers there. Trying to see if I can just restrict it just a little bit. I've been trying to work the angle on my pliers to allow me to have a little bit further restriction. This gets me really, really close all the time, but not quite far enough a lot. So now I have a definite gap under the shoe. You can probably see it actually, it's so big. Yeah, see? So that's too far. So now we gotta go back, and you've got to repeat this over and over and over again until you get it absolutely perfect. Open it up, close it up. You know, it's just, this is why shoes take so long with a TJet. You can spend, like I said, 3 hours on a pair of shoes. So, still a little bit too restricted. Now, if you bend a shoe too many times, it's still a piece of metal. Eventually, it will just, you know, snap off, because it's only got so much malleability to it before it just, the tensile strength breaks it. So, you know, you want to try not to go too aggressive too many times back and forth. Take this out and look. I prefer to look up into a light because it's just easier for me to see than to try and peer down into the abyss, which is what I felt like I was doing right there. So I'm just it was still restricted just a hair too much. I'm now unrestricting it. Gonna look at it again. Still too much. So this is the pleasure, the guilty pleasure of TJT guys. They love to tinker, and this is one way you can just tinker a car into. You can tinker a car into the main, or you can tinker the car out of the main, depending on how much time you spend and if you know what you're doing or not. You can do this on the fly and get really, really lucky. All of us have done that. And you can do this and get really, really unlucky and ruin your race. So I am really close. Now, another word of advice here. So we get this really, really close. We get this, you know, perfected. And then the next step I do is I get the shoe fairly close in terms on the rail block before I do anything else. And then I start fine-tuning everything. The reason why I do it in that order is because when you start tinkering around with the rail height, come on, shoe. When you start tinkering around with the rail height block, you can create a twist in the shoe, and that twist in the shoe, you know, you need to get that taken care of, which we will go over when we get to it. So. Shoe is just not being my friend. I think I was actually riding on a little bit of flashing that might have been there on the shoe or the chassis, now that I'm looking closer. And a word of advice, you typically would rather be a little bit less restricted than more restricted if you have to make a choice there. The reason for that is you'd rather have connection than not have connection. If the car's sputtering, it arcs everything, it creates all kinds of joyous occasion things which drive you nuts as a driver. And so, you know, we just want to keep that. We want to keep the car as consistent as possible. It's all about consistency. You know, Fray racing is about consistency, so you know where the car is going to be at all times, so you know exactly how hard to press the throttle. All right, so how are we here? All right, so I finally have it. So now, when I push up, everything moves up at the same time, and it's still just barely touching the block. So the next thing I'll do is I will grab whatever rail block I'm using. This is the RTHO 9, 8, 9, 10, 11. I've got scales. I've got the one that Jocham had made a long time ago, which was the original one, which is 12, 14, 16, 18, which my track's about 14. So we'll plop this here, and then you want to look sideways. Almost always when you're at 300, our shoes will be a little bit heel heavy. So it's hard to see sometimes with the front end on. I've seen some guys, you know, try to do things a different way. I've never been able to do that. So now we're a little heel heavy, so I'm going to put the pliers on the shoe like so that way I don't bend that. So we need the toe to touch more, so I'm going to push so the toe will touch some more. Now when you do this, you can, I'm sure there are more sophisticated ways to keep the shoe straight. I'm absolutely certain that somebody has done it. This is just how I do things. You can, you know, I'm going to take this out and look at it closer. So now I bent it, and I'm a little bit too far on the toe. Now, you can take this as far as you want. You can do, I mean, I've seen guys with basically with microscopes on their shoes. I've seen guys with, you know, just 10x loops, the headsets that a lot of guys wear. And that's, I know a lot of you know this, but some people don't. So you want the shoe to be riding the entire length, front to back, on whatever you deem the rail height of your track to be. If your track is 14 thou, like mine is 14 to 15. If your track is a Viper track, it's typically 13. A Bowman track is typically around 10 or 11. Max is usually at 12. Plastic tracks are normally closer to 14 because they have so many bumps in them. So you need to kind of identify what your rail height you're racing on a track is. So that's, you know, and there's really no way of doing that other than, you know, trying a car at 11, seeing where it marks. A little tip trick, if you're in a hurry or if you just need a quick setup check, you can use a dry erase marker, believe it or not, and put that on the shoes and run about 2 feet, or push the car 2 feet, run 2 feet, whatever you deem. I don't think you'll be able to see this, but the shoe is now laying flat on there, and you'll want to tap on the back just like anything else. It's kind of sitting crooked, so it kind of goes a little nuts. And it should touch way back here under your glass and way up here, and it should lift in synchronization. If you see it tilt to the front when you lift, it should not tilt to the front. It should just lift in general. If it tilts to the front, that probably means that your shoe is at an angle here. And so what you don't want to have happen is, so you can get a false sense of reading, you can be tilted one way or the other on the front shoe, and you will have to go in and do this to an old shoe. You will have, like, what I'll do is I'll take this, I'll hold where I don't want it to bend, and I will bend it whichever direction. Like, so I'll twist it a little bit that way if it was meant the wrong way, and vice versa. So you don't want to have that twist there, because that twist is hard to do. You can sometimes see it on just the flat block. Sometimes it doesn't really show up until it's on one of these blocks, and it's very difficult to see sometimes, and it's very frustrating. Pickup shoes are just very frustrating in general to most people. This shoe is probably about done. I'm not going to go over shoe tension. The reason I'm not going to go over shoe tension is there are so many variables with shoe tension. One is just the meter you measure it with. I use a spring gauge, a Corex gauge. Some people use a scale. Corex gauges typically are very close to each other, but not always. The scales are all over the place. So I can give you generic numbers off my stuff, but it's probably not going to match up to your stuff. So I don't want you to take my numbers and think they're gold. What I would do is take a car that runs really, really good, compare it on your device, and know that that's what your optimal spring tension is for that track. I mean, spring tension changes with the amount of downforce your cars have, the type of downforce in the rail, the type of rail material, everything, it goes into that. So there's no perfect answer for every track for what the Fray is, or for what, Fray cars run. At the Fray, typically, we're running, on a Corex gauge between 1.5 and 2 grams, typically. And so I've seen people drop their cars to 1 gram because they wanted a really good handling car. I've seen guys run 2.5 because they just like speed. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think the best cars are always suited for the best drivers. But I do think that doing all these things in succession and figuring out how to get everything you can out of it is really all in the shoes. You can have 10 equal cars, and the guy who has the best shoes with equal drivers will win the race. And that's basically what comes down to it. The Fray is everybody's equal drivers, pretty equal equipment for the most part, and one guy just has that car that's just everything's perfect about it that day. So take that into consideration when you do this, but it's all about getting these shoes absolutely flat on this block, just barely touching on this block, and flat on both blocks. So you want it to be flat here and flat here when you look this way at the shoe. And that's the skinniest shoes. It's really not hard. It's just extremely tedious, and I got one shoe done already, and that's what, 15 minutes or so, probably, so 20 minutes. And so I've done a shoe in 5 minutes. I've taken an hour on one shoe. I've thrown one away and started over because I've bent it a million times. It just doesn't like me. So hopefully this will help you with your shoes in the future, and hopefully we can see some better cars out there. That's really the conclusion of the video series, I believe. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. Thanks.